Why did the general seize her weapon that day? Was it discipline or something darker, something he couldn't afford to admit? The sun hung low over the training field, glaring off the rows of rifles lined neatly on the rack. Cadets stood at attention, boots planted, faces unreadable. And then, without warning, General reached out and ripped Brown's rifle from her hands. His voice was calm but sharp enough to cut bone. "You're unstable, Brown, emotional, too unpredictable to be trusted with this weapon." He thought the gesture would humiliate her, a public lesson, an example for the others. What he didn't expect was for the 22-year-old Welsh cadet to pivot, use the momentum of his arm against him, and snap his wrist with surgical precision. The sound cracked across the silent range, followed by a scream as he staggered back. And she didn't flinch, didn't falter. She picked up his own sidearm and then, with every eye on her, hit 17 targets in flawless succession. No hesitation, no miss. One shot after another, clean, controlled, perfect. By the time the smoke cleared, the general wasn't the one giving lessons anymore. He was the one facing them. But this story, it didn't begin on that range. Not really. It began in the Welsh valleys, years earlier, where Brown first learned what courage meant. Her grandfather had been her world. Brown, a decorated World War II veteran, who wore his age like armor and carried his scars like maps. On Saturday mornings, while other kids were at football practice or glued to television screens, followed her grandfather up a winding path to the old quarry behind their village. He'd set tin cans on fence posts, bottles along broken stone walls, scrap wood balanced on rocks, targets in the silence. "Steady breath, steady heart, Fee," he'd whisper, leaning over her shoulder, his hands weathered but steady as they guided hers. "The rifle is only an extension of your will, but your will," he'd tap her chest, "has to be pure." She was 10 the first time she outshot him. 16 when she began outshooting men twice her age at the local rifle club. At 18, she was holding national trophies, standing on podiums with medals clinking against her chest, wondering if the path her grandfather dreamed for her might really exist. The recruiters noticed. They always do. Promises followed, advanced marksmanship, a future built on discipline and service. Her parents were less convinced. Her father warned her about a man's world that would never forgive her for being different. Her mother worried about femininity swallowed by a uniform, but wasn't running from the valleys to hide. She was running toward something, toward the chance to prove that women could serve, fight, and excel without apology. When she arrived at the Royal Military Academy, the history seeped through the walls. Red brick, gleaming parade grounds, echoes of generations drilled into every blade of grass. It looked like honor, smelled like tradition. Legends were born here. She wanted to be one of them. But legends come at a price. On her first day, she met him, General Commander of the Small Arms Training Division, a man who carried himself like a stone pillar, rigid, immovable, and utterly convinced of his own permanence. His career stretched across Afghanistan, Iraq, and decades of commendations. And yet, when his cold eyes scanned, they didn't see potential. They saw a problem. "Miss Brown," he said, deliberately skipping her rank. "Impressive scores for civilian practice, but military marksmanship isn't about stationary targets in quiet fields. It's about making decisions when men's lives hang on the line. It's about mental fortitude. And in my experience," his pause was surgical, "women hesitate. They overthink. They get emotional. And emotional soldiers get people killed." Bit her tongue so hard it almost bled. Every instinct told her to fire back, to push against the stereotype. But she only nodded once. "I understand, sir. I'm here to prove myself, through performance." His thin smile was the kind that hides teeth. "We'll see." The other cadets treated her with polite indifference. No outright hostility, but no warmth either. They were waiting, watching, expecting her to stumble, waiting for failure to confirm what they already believed. But not everyone kept their distance. Sarah, her bunkmate, a strategist from London with parents who prized education above all else, carried her own battles. She whispered truths in the barracks one night, truths no one dared put on paper. He's been here 15 years. Never let a single woman graduate the advanced program. They always transfer out, or they break, or they're pushed until they quit. Listened in silence, her heart sinking with every word. It started small: faulty scopes, ammunition that misfired, protective gear that didn't fit. Each time she complained, shook his head as though disappointed in her excuses. Adapt, Brown. That's what soldiers do. Or don't you have the stomach for imperfection? And still she outshot half the men on the range. Even standing at the back row, barely able to hear his commands, she outshot them. He called it beginner's luck. James, a quiet cadet from Scotland, approached her one evening, his voice low. I saw him, adjusting your scope before the test. His words carried the sting of confirmation. She wasn't imagining it. But complaint meant weakness, and weakness meant he'd win. So adapted. She practiced with mismatched rifles, memorized calibrations, worked twice as hard to maintain the same edge. She refused to let him strip away the foundation her grandfather had given her. But wasn't finished. He reassigned her to radio duty during live-fire drills, made her carry stretchers while others rotated through sniper posts, called her hesitation female fragility, loud enough for everyone to hear. Each humiliation landed like a stone in her stomach. 6 weeks in, her scores were solid but not exceptional, and that was all he needed. A paper trail proving she lacked the resilience required for advanced roles. And then came Sarah's breaking point. It was a combat simulation, gunfire blaring from loudspeakers, explosions shaking the ground. Sarah's hands trembled, her shots went wide, her breath broke into sobs. Seized the moment like a predator. He called the whole unit to watch. This, he boomed, is exactly what I've warned you about: emotional instability under fire, a liability, a danger, a weakness. Sarah's tears fell onto her rifle. And's anger crystallized into something else. Not hot, not reckless, but sharp, cold, controlled. That night she stared at the ceiling of the barracks long after lights out. Her chest rose and fell with quiet fury. Enough was enough. If wanted a lesson, she would teach him one. But first she would wait, watch, document, build her strength in silence until the right moment came. The day she would break his grip, not just on her rifle but on the system itself, was coming. And when it arrived, he wouldn't see it until it was too late. What do you do when the system itself is against you? When every step forward is met by invisible hands pulling you back? Brown woke the next morning with clarity burning in her chest. Her bunkmate Sarah was gone, transferred out, her spirit broken. The empty bed felt heavier than steel, but didn't pack her own bags. She sharpened her resolve. If wanted silence, he would get the opposite. She began documenting everything. Every cracked scope, every tampered rifle, every sneer and disparaging word disguised as instruction. A leather notebook slid beneath her mattress became her weapon. Dates, times, witnesses. A careful archive of what the others whispered about but never dared put into writing. Patterns began to emerge. A line of women before her, cadets who had entered the program and vanished from it one by one. Transfers, washouts, dismissals. 11 out of 12 gone in 2 years, and the one who remained, buried in paperwork, not even given the chance to fire a weapon. It wasn't incompetence, it wasn't coincidence, it was design. But design is harder to prove than suspicion. The weeks rolled on, each one heavier than the last. Her precision held steady, but sabotage only sharpened. On the morning of the precision shooting assessment, the test that would decide who advanced to sniper training, she found her assigned rifle had been damaged. The firing pin filed down just enough to betray her. She reported it. Sergeant Davies smirked. Typical excuse-making. His words were loud enough for others to hear, loud enough to plant seeds of doubt. Forced to use a backup rifle, its scope tuned for a different shooter, took her position. Her breath steadied. Her heart slowed. She fired. One after another, bullets tore through the air, hitting 18 of 20 targets. By ordinary standards, it was remarkable. It was adequate. 18 out of 20, he announced, with disappointment dripping from his voice. Fine for infantry, but hardly the standard for specialization. Perhaps you should consider support roles. James met her afterward, fists clenched in fury. He tampered with it. I saw him. This isn't training, this is sabotage. But whispers weren't enough. She needed proof that could stand on its own, even against a man with power. The sabotage escalated. During tactical drills, manipulated the scenarios himself, radio in hand, adding stressors designed only for her. Smoke, blinding lights, targets in places no one else had to face. And still she fought through, steady as she could be. But at night, in the quiet of the barracks, doubt crept in. What if she couldn't win? What if he broke her as he'd broken the others? It was her grandfather who steadied her. From a pay phone outside the barracks, she spilled everything. The sabotage, the humiliation, the endless grind against invisible walls. He listened without interruption, only breathing down the line until her voice cracked with exhaustion. "Fee, love," he finally said in that soft Welsh tone. "I've seen men like him before. During the war, they decided who was fit to fight before the first shot was ever fired. Too young, too small, too educated, too poor. They'd find reasons to prove themselves right, even if it meant wasting good soldiers." Her voice trembled. "So what did you do?" "Sometimes," he said, "you play their game long enough to change the rules. The question isn't whether you want his respect. It's whether you're willing to fight for something bigger than his approval." His words cut through the fog like a signal flare. She had been fighting for validation when what she needed was truth. Not just for herself, for everyone who would come after. The next morning's fight changed. She stopped reacting. She started recording. Calm, surgical, each humiliation was evidence. Each sabotage a note in her growing case. But she couldn't do it alone. Her search for allies led her to a name whispered in corridors: Lieutenant Hayes. Once a top scorer, now sidelined into administrative work, arranged a meeting off base, slipping into in plain clothes. His eyes held years of disappointment, but also recognition. "He's good at this," said. "Every failure looks like your fault. The misfired rounds, the faulty scopes, it all blends in as part of training. But the men don't get the same equipment, don't face the same obstacles." Leaned closer. "So it's not just me." Shook her head. "It's never just one. He builds a system where women fail by design. Then he points to the results and says, 'See, I was right.'" Through, connected with others. Women who had walked into his program bright with hope, only to be spit out broken, convinced they weren't good enough. Their stories were mirrors of her own. And then came the validation she needed. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a military psychologist who had left the service in protest, reviewed notes. Her verdict was clear. This wasn't tough training. This was psychological warfare dressed as evaluation. "He's created a self-fulfilling prophecy," Dr. Warren said, her voice firm. "He undermines confidence, manipulates conditions, and calls the results proof. It's not training, it's sabotage, and it damages readiness more than it develops it." For the first time, felt the ground shift beneath her. It wasn't just her word against his anymore. She had experts, witnesses, allies. But proof without exposure meant nothing. That chance came sooner than she expected. Announced a demonstration for NATO observers. Generals, defense ministers, international officials, all watching innovative training methods. A chance, he boasted, to showcase excellence. Realized instantly, this was it, her moment. If he sabotaged her here, it wouldn't just be whispers in barracks or scribbles in notebooks. It would be in front of the world. But the realization came with fear. If she failed, if she cracked, she wouldn't just lose her career. She'd validate his lies forever. That night lay awake, her mind quiet. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about hitting targets. She was thinking about breaking chains. Her grandfather's words echoed in her head. Play the game until you can change the rules. And tomorrow, in front of NATO, she would change them. What happens when truth collides with power, in front of witnesses who cannot look away? The morning of the NATO demonstration arrived bright and sharp. The sky stretched blue over the academy. Woke before the bugle, hands steady, heart calm in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost sacred. Today wasn't just another exercise. It was Judgment Day. The parade grounds buzzed with movement. Cadets in perfect formation. Flags snapping in the wind. Uniforms pressed to razor edges. And among the crowd, the observers, men and women in medals and polished shoes, generals and defense ministers from 12 allied nations. They had come to watch Britain's best, to study the future of training. They had come to see innovation. Stood at the front like a king before his court. His cast of cadets behind him, his words wrapped in authority. Today, he announced, you will witness evaluation protocols that separate true warriors from those who merely wear the uniform. Modern warfare demands resilience, emotional stability, split-second decision-making under fire. These are not taught. They are inherent. Inherent heard the word like a blade. She knew exactly what he meant. Women lacked it. The observers nodded thoughtfully, jotting notes. His posture radiated certainty. This was his theater, his script, and she was meant to be his tragic proof. The demonstrations began with the male cadets. Urban combat simulations, tactical rotations, precision shooting with weapons calibrated and tested. The results were good, clean, predictable, exactly as intended. Then came her name. Cadet Brown. She stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel. Every head turned. His voice carried across the PA, smooth and cold. Cadet Brown represents our commitment to equality of opportunity. Today, she will demonstrate how our methods apply equally to all candidates, regardless of characteristics. The pause was deliberate, physical characteristics, gender. The female observers stiffened, caught a flicker in their eyes, recognition. They had lived this battle in their own careers. Gestured toward the firing line. Today's test, moving targets across a 300-meter range, time limited, adaptability required. But when approached the rack, she froze for half a breath. The weapon waiting for her wasn't the one issued for training. It was a different model entirely, with an unfamiliar scope and a trigger so heavy it strained against the finger. His voice dripped with false explanation. We believe in testing adaptability. In combat, soldiers don't get to choose their favorite weapon. Murmurs rustled among the delegation. Some nodded, others frowned, said nothing. She inspected the rifle, noted the misaligned scope tuned for a shooter much taller. She adjusted her stance, bent her neck unnaturally, not perfect, not fair, but usable. She lay prone, heart rate slow, finger on steel. The first target appeared, a silhouette popping up for 3 seconds. 200 meters, she fired. The bullet cut air, split through target, perfect. Lucky, muttered, forgetting his microphone carried his voice to the delegation. Several officials exchanged glances. The next targets came faster, erratic, unpredictable, adjusted with every breath, compensating for the faulty scope, the heavy trigger, the awkward stance. Shots landed clean, one after another. Her rhythm was steady, almost hypnotic. And his face began to tighten. This wasn't the failure he'd scripted. He stepped closer to the control board, voice sharp. Increase the stressors. Suddenly, floodlights flared, blinding. Loudspeakers thundered with simulated gunfire and explosions. Smoke hissed from machines, curling into her line of sight. The male cadets hadn't faced this. This was escalation, pure and deliberate. For a second, the world blurred white and gray. then heard her grandfather's voice in memory, steady breath, steady heart. Her fingers squeezed. Targets dropped one after another through smoke and chaos. Silence fell around the range. Even the delegation stopped writing, their eyes locked on the woman who refused to break. His jaw clenched. He saw control slipping, the narrative unraveling. He needed something dramatic, something final. Safety violation. His voice boomed suddenly, slicing through the stillness. He strode onto the range, arm raised. "Cadet Brown, surrender your weapon immediately." The command was absurd. His weapon was pointed downrange, her safety protocols perfect. No rule had been broken. The observers knew it, but pressed forward, voice rising. "You are showing signs of emotional instability, elevated breathing, compromised decision-making. For the safety of these distinguished guests, your exercise is terminated." His words echoed with desperation. Lowered the rifle slightly, calm. "Sir, I have violated no safety protocols. My performance has exceeded standards despite the modifications applied. I request clarification." Her voice carried clear, professional, not defensive, not emotional. And that was his undoing. His face flushed red. "You are disobeying a lawful order. Your refusal proves the insubordination I've warned of." He stepped closer, fury cracking through his mask. General of Poland raised her hand from the observation area. "Excuse me, General," she said. "In our protocols, termination requires documented safety violations. Could you specify?" Faltered, classified methods, he spat. More murmurs, doubt spread like fire. Defense Minister leaned toward her aide, her expression sharp. She had noticed the smoke, the lights, the tampered equipment. She was taking notes. Saw his empire crumbling. He lunged forward, hand outstretched. "Enough, hand me the weapon." Time slowed. His fingers closed on cold steel. Authority demanded surrender. Every cadet, every observer, every officer held their breath. But didn't let go. She pivoted smoothly, used his forward momentum against him, and with one fluid movement, snap. The crack of bone echoed louder than the gunfire. Stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his scream tearing across the range. Stood firm, rifle steady in her hands, breathing calm. "Sir," she said clearly, "you attempted to seize my weapon without citing specific safety violations. I defended according to protocol. I am prepared to continue the exercise, or stand down if legitimate safety concerns exist." The silence was absolute. Observers stared in disbelief. They had just watched a general lose control, while the cadet he called unstable remained the only steady one on the field. Every camera recorded it. Every pen scribbled it down. The truth had broken free, and it was undeniable. What happens after a mask shatters? When authority falls not with a whisper, but with the sound of breaking bone. The crack of his wrist still echoed across the range when silence swept through the crowd. For one long moment, no one moved. The general, once untouchable, staggered backward, clutching his arm, rage twisting his features. And opposite him, steady, unshaken, stood Brown, rifle secure, her breathing calm as if nothing at all had happened. The illusion was broken. Then chaos ignited. Medics rushed forward. Observers huddled together, their voices urgent, their pens scratching furiously across notebooks. NATO officials whispered in languages from across the continent. Cadets stared, stunned, caught between loyalty to rank and the undeniable evidence of what they had just witnessed. Colonel Thornton, deputy commandant of the academy, strode forward, her presence cutting through the disorder like a blade. A veteran of 3 deployments, she was known for her fairness, her iron professionalism. And now, with every eye watching, she took command. "Cadet Brown," she said firmly, "make your weapon safe." Obeyed instantly, clearing the chamber, locking the rifle, lowering it to the bench. Her movements were crisp, precise, unshakable. "General," Thornton turned sharply, her voice crisp, "report to medical immediately. You are relieved of command pending review." His face flushed crimson. "This is insubordination," he spat. "A disgrace." But Thornton's tone was ice. "That's an order, General." For the first time in decades, found himself outranked, not by position but by credibility. He was escorted off the field, his curses trailing behind him like smoke. The observers didn't let it rest. General of Poland approached Thornton, her arms crossed, voice cutting. "Colonel, what we witnessed was not legitimate training. It was systematic discrimination, different equipment, additional stressors, fabricated violations." Defense Minister of France added, and the disparity was obvious. Male cadets received standard conditions. Cadet Brown faced sabotage. Thornton nodded once, gravely. "An immediate investigation will be conducted. All recordings, documentation, and witness statements are to be preserved without delay." And so, in the shadow of his downfall, the machinery of truth began to turn. The next 48 hours were a storm. Thornton assembled a team of investigators, military police, external observers, administrative officers. Every piece of equipment used in training was seized, every rifle inspected, every logbook. His office was locked and sealed. Witnesses were called. First the cadets, then the instructors, then the overlooked voices who had quietly endured what now exposed. And the story they told was damning. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward first, emboldened by his defiance. She laid down years of documents, equipment logs that showed patterns of faulty gear assigned to women, performance reviews that penalized female cadets for the same behaviors praised in men, records of transfers, dismissals, and career dead ends. This was not coincidence, she told the panel. It was a system designed to ensure women failed. James came next. His voice was quiet, but his words carried weight. "I watched him tamper with her scope. I saw him modify drills only when she was on the line. He even gave us warnings from them. It wasn't training. It was sabotage." More cadets followed, each confirming what the others said. Faulty ammunition, silent changes to scenarios, public humiliations disguised as lessons. And then came the experts. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the military psychologist, had sought out, reviewed the evidence. Her testimony was clear, measured, devastating. This was not tough training. This was psychological warfare. By systematically undermining confidence and sabotaging performance, created artificial failure. Then he pointed to those failures as proof of his beliefs. It is deliberate and it is destructive. The investigators leaned forward, pens scratching faster. For the first time, the words systematic discrimination appeared in official notes. The deeper they dug, the darker it grew. Technical specialists disassembled rifles and scopes. They found misaligned optics deliberately tuned for failure. Ammunition batches riddled with higher misfire rates, always assigned to female cadets. Protective equipment sized incorrectly, impairing movement and accuracy. Patterns emerged too clean to be accidents. And then the paper trail. Letters, emails, and private communications recovered from his office revealed discussions with other officers, notes on how to maintain standards, recommendations on limiting unsuitable candidates. A coded language that, when stripped bare, was unmistakable, strategies to exclude women under the guise of discipline. Thornton's face hardened as she read them. What had begun as one officer's misconduct was looking more like an entire network. Sat alone in the barracks that night, listening to the muffled voices of investigators in nearby offices. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she felt a strange stillness, a quiet weight pressing on her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. She thought of Sarah, who had left convinced she wasn't strong enough. Of Hayes, buried in paperwork despite brilliance. Of the nameless cadets who had disappeared from programs across the years, their confidence shattered, their dreams abandoned. She whispered to herself almost as prayer, no more. Her notebook, once her secret weapon, now lay in investigators' hands. Her voice, once dismissed, was being amplified by others who finally stepped into the light. The system that had tried to break her was now cracking open for all to see. But also knew wasn't finished. Men like him never went quietly. Even with a broken wrist, even stripped of command, his influence ran deep. Allies in shadows, sympathizers in silence, and if the investigation grew wide enough, it might uncover things that reached far beyond him. As she lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling beams, she realized this wasn't the end of the battle. It was the beginning of a war she had never intended to fight. The question wasn't whether she could shoot straight anymore. The question was whether she could endure the storm that exposing the truth would bring. And deep down she knew the worst was still to come. What happens when a single fracture reveals the rot of an entire structure? The broken wrist was only the beginning. Within days, the investigation spread like fire, consuming not just its office, but the corridors of itself. Colonel Thornton moved quickly. Files were secured, communications seized, witnesses protected. NATO observers remained on site, their very presence ensuring transparency. The academy, once humming with routine, now buzzed with tension. Every cadet, every officer, every staff member knew that something unprecedented was unfolding. The evidence poured in. Lieutenant Hayes provided detailed logs, equipment assignments, training schedules, evaluation sheets, all showing patterns too consistent to ignore. Faulty gear disproportionately assigned to women, extra stressors introduced only during their drills, scores consistently lowered for identical performance. This isn't just unfair, told investigators, her voice steady despite years of being silenced. It's engineered failure. Technical experts confirmed it. They examined rifles used by female cadets and found deliberate ammunition lots riddled with higher misfire rates, protective vests several sizes off, restricting movement. Each discovery added weight to the mountain of proof. But the real blow came when investigators cracked encrypted files. Buried deep within his computer were communications with other officers, defense contractors, even government officials, a web of correspondence under the banner of preserving standards. They spoke in coded language, phrases like limiting unsuitable candidates, maintaining combat purity, protecting tradition. But the meaning was unmistakable. Wasn't alone, he was part of something larger. A network, the so-called Standards Preservation Group. An informal alliance of senior officers, defense industry leaders, and sympathetic politicians. Their shared belief that women in combat roles weaken the military. Their shared goal, to ensure female cadets never advanced far enough to prove them wrong. It was more than bias. It was sabotage disguised as discipline, a conspiracy cloaked in patriotism. The deeper investigators dug, the more they found. Defense contractors funneling consulting fees to and others like him. Payments tied to research proving women lacked combat suitability. Studies, statistics manipulated, training data, all to uphold a narrative that women were inherently unfit for the battlefield. The scandal widened beyond. Whispers spread through NATO. Were these methods being exported, replicated? How many Allied militaries had unknowingly adopted innovative protocols born from prejudice? For it was dizzying. She had come here to prove herself with a rifle. Now she was watching the foundation of an entire institution crack under the weight of truth. The testimonies grew bolder. Sarah, once broken by humiliation, returned to the academy to speak. Her hands shook as she described how singled her out, ridiculed her in front of the unit, pushed her until tears blurred her sights. "I thought it was me," she admitted softly. "I thought I wasn't strong enough, but it wasn't me. It was him. It was the system." Other women stepped forward. Captain Jennifer, convinced years ago that she lacked the natural ability to be a pilot after constant accidents in training flights. Major Sandra repeatedly passed over for promotion after biased evaluations painted her as hesitant under pressure. Lieutenant Foster, who left the service entirely when told she was temperamentally unsuited for leadership. Each story was heartbreakingly familiar, each one proof that methods weren't isolated, they were replicated, taught, encouraged. Even's allies began to crack. Captain Williams, his second-in-command, with visible shame. I knew what he was doing was wrong, but questioning him meant career suicide. He made sure of that, so I stayed silent. His silence had helped fuel the system, but his testimony began dismantling it. The investigation reached Parliament. Headlines exploded across Britain. General accused of systematic sabotage. Scandal rocks military establishment. Television anchors spoke the words few thought they'd hear. Gender discrimination, not as isolated incidents but as policy, as design. And through it all, his name rose. The cadet who broke her general's wrist. The one who refused to shatter under pressure. The one whose calm defiance exposed a rot that had festered for decades. But with recognition came risk. Some called her a hero, others branded her a traitor. Online forums lit up with praise and venom alike. Traditionalists claimed she was destroying military standards for political correctness. Advocates hailed her as a symbol of reform. Inside the academy, the atmosphere thickened. Some cadets avoided her, afraid of association. Others quietly slipped her notes of support. "Thank you," one read tucked into her locker. Another, "Don't stop," carried them like bullets in a magazine. Small, silent reminders of why she couldn't back down. The scope of the conspiracy stunned even the investigators. The Standards Preservation Group had fingers in multiple institutions, training academies, research bodies, even defense industries. Dr. Elizabeth Warren explained it best during a closed session. This isn't just bias, it's psychological warfare. They've created systems designed to break confidence, then pointed to the broken pieces as proof of weakness. It's not about protecting standards, it's about protecting control. Her words landed like artillery. And then came the financial records, payments from defense companies too, consulting fees tied to research that conveniently concluded women weren't combat capable, contracts awarded to firms that benefited from limiting competition. Millions of pounds moved under the banner of military readiness, but in truth, it was corruption. Its motive wasn't just prejudice, it was profit. The scandal reached NATO headquarters. Allies who had admired British training began second-guessing whether they, too, had adopted poisoned methods. General demanded reviews across European militaries. Defense Minister presented evidence to the European Parliament, warning that discriminatory training weakened rather than strengthened readiness. What we witnessed, she declared, wasn't discipline, it was sabotage. Excellence must be measured by performance, not prejudice. Her words echoed across capitals. Reforms began before the trial even started. For the whirlwind was overwhelming. She had wanted only to be a soldier. Now she was a symbol. She sat in the mess hall one evening, her tray untouched, staring at the buzz of cadets around her. James slid into the seat across from her. His eyes were tired but steady. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I've just told the truth." He leaned closer. "No, you've cracked something that's been holding for decades, and they're terrified not just of you, of everything you represent." Looked down at her hands, calloused from training, from drills. They didn't feel like the hands of a revolutionary. But maybe revolutions don't begin with banners or speeches. Maybe they begin with one cadet refusing to let go of her rifle. The court-martial was inevitable. Would face charges, discrimination, sabotage, assault against a subordinate, conduct unbecoming of an officer. But everyone knew the trial wouldn't just be about him. It would be about precedent. about whether the military would cling to its shadows or step into the light. Major Sarah Blackwood, a prosecutor known for dismantling institutional corruption, took the case. Her words too were blunt. "We're not just putting on trial, we're putting the system on trial. If we win, this won't just end his career. It will change the law." Nodded slowly, feeling the weight settle on her shoulders. This was bigger than marksmanship, bigger than her grandfather's lessons, bigger than even her own survival. The storm she had unleashed was now a tidal wave. And as the trial approached, one question haunted her more than all the others. Would truth be enough to topple a system built on lies? What does justice look like when the accused once held absolute power? The courtroom was heavy with silence, its walls lined with flags, its benches filled with uniforms from across the ranks. Generals, colonels, captains, all there not just to judge but to weigh the very soul of the institution they served. Cameras were forbidden, but reporters filled every seat outside. The nation was listening. The world was listening. Entered flanked by lawyers, his wrists still bound in a brace, his uniform immaculate, medals polished. Even in disgrace, he carried himself like a man convinced of victory. His eyes scanned the room and lingered on for half a second. There was no shame in them, only contempt. The charges were read aloud. Sabotage of training equipment. Systematic discrimination against female cadets. Assault on a subordinate during live exercise. Conduct unbecoming an officer. Each word rang out like a hammer strike. The prosecutor, Major Sarah Blackwood, rose first. Her voice was steady, clipped, sharpened by years of cutting through corruption. "This is not the trial of one man," she said. "This is the trial of a system that has allowed prejudice to masquerade as discipline. General is not merely guilty of individual acts. He is guilty of engineering failure, of sabotaging soldiers under his command, of corrupting the very standards he swore to uphold. Today, you will hear evidence. You will hear testimony, and you will see the truth." The defense countered with equal force. His lawyer, Colonel Graves, was seasoned and ruthless. He painted as a traditionalist, a man misunderstood unfairly for demanding excellence. "My client," he declared, "is guilty only of expecting the highest standards. He is a soldier of honor, decorated and tested in combat. What Cadet Brown calls sabotage is nothing more than rigorous training. What she calls discrimination is the reality of war. Men and women are not the same." He did not undermine her. He exposed her instability, instability proven by the violent attack that left him injured before observers. The words hung in the air, sharp, calculated. For a moment, murmurs rippled through the gallery. His jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Not yet. The testimonies began. Hayes was called first. She stood with shoulders squared, voice steady as she laid out the logs, the records, the years of hidden patterns. She described watching women fail under impossible conditions, conditions never applied to men. The defense pressed hard. "Lieutenant Hayes, isn't it true you were passed over for promotion, that you may have a personal grudge against my client?" Her voice didn't waver. "My career suffered, yes, because of the system General built, but this isn't about my resentment, it's about truth." Then James took the stand. His quiet strength filled the room as he described what he saw, tampering with scope, altering drills, withholding warnings. The defense sneered. "Cadet, are you not close friends with Cadet Brown? Could your testimony be biased?" James met's lawyer's eyes without flinching. "Bias doesn't bend scopes. Bias doesn't load faulty ammunition. I saw what I saw." Each witness chipped away its defense, brick by brick. But it was Sarah's testimony that shifted the room. She trembled as she described being humiliated in front of her peers, her tears mocked as weakness, her confidence broken beyond repair. "I thought it was me," she whispered. "I thought I wasn't strong enough, but it wasn't me, it was him. And I want it on record, he destroyed good soldiers because they were women." For a moment, Even the hardest faces in the room softened. The defense retaliated. They called their own witnesses, loyal officers who claimed methods were tough but fair. They painted women who failed as fragile, unsuited for the battlefield. He demanded perfection, one major, and if they couldn't meet it, that's on them, not him. The lawyer hammered the point. General did not discriminate, he exposed weakness, and weakness in war is fatal. The words sliced deep. The narrative was shifting again. Then came's turn. She rose from her seat, walked to the stand, and swore the oath. The courtroom hushed. Every eye locked on her, the cadet who had broken her general's wrist, the woman at the center of it all. The prosecutor guided her gently. "Cadet Brown, can you describe your experiences under General's command?" Spoke calmly, each word measured, each pause heavy. She described the faulty equipment, the sabotaged rifles, the humiliations. She recounted the NATO demonstration, the smoke, the lights, the attempt to seize her weapon. "Why didn't you let go?" the prosecutor asked. "Because," said her voice steady, "no one, no matter their rank, has the right to seize a soldier's weapon without cause. To surrender would have endangered everyone present. I followed protocol. He did not." Her words hung in the air like steel. Then came the cross-examination. The lawyer leaned forward, voice sharp. "Cadet Brown, isn't it true that you assaulted your commanding officer? Isn't it true you broke his wrist in front of NATO, an act of humiliation that damaged the reputation of this academy?" Met his gaze, unflinching. "I defended myself and those present against an unlawful seizure. His injury was the result of his own aggression." The lawyer pressed harder. "Or was it the result of your instability, your inability to control your emotions? After all, witnesses say you were under stress, breathing heavily, even trembling during the exercise. Isn't that evidence of emotional fragility?" Her chest rose once, slow, steady. Then she answered. "Stress is not fragility. Fear is not weakness. Courage is doing your duty despite them. That's what I did. And that's what every woman before me tried to do until men like him made it impossible." For a moment, silence blanketed the courtroom. Evan's lawyer faltered. The trial stretched for days. Evidence piled higher. Each side fought with words like weapons. Outside, protests gathered, some demanding reform, others defending as a victim of political correctness. Became both hero and target. Every headline carried her name. Every whisper in the barracks followed her steps. She was no longer just a cadet. She was a symbol. And symbols, she realized, are heavy to carry. Late one night, she sat in her quarters, staring at the stack of letters that had arrived, supporters thanking her for courage, detractors calling her a traitor. James knocked quietly and entered. "You all right?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "I never wanted this." He nodded. "That's why it matters. Heroes never do." As the trial neared its end, the outcome remained uncertain. His network was powerful, his allies persuasive. The defense painted him as a scapegoat, a man punished for holding the line. The prosecution painted him as a saboteur, a man who had poisoned the institution he claimed to serve. The judges listened, unreadable, and knew her final testimony might decide it all. The weight pressed heavy, but her grandfather's words whispered again in memory. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." The question was, when the final moment came, would her dignity be enough to tip the scales of justice? What does it feel like to wait for judgment, when the weight of an entire institution hangs in the balance? The final day of trial arrived under a gray sky. Rain tapped against the windows of the military court, a steady rhythm like a drummer marking time. Inside, every seat was filled. Uniforms, dignitaries, NATO officials, journalists scribbling furiously. The air was thick with anticipation. Sat rigid in her chair, she hadn't slept. None of the cadets had. For weeks, their lives had been frozen in the storm of this trial, careers stalled, futures uncertain. But today the gavel would fall. Entered like a man refusing defeat. His brace still bound his wrist, but his posture was tall, his chin raised. He had always carried himself as if invincible, and even now, with evidence stacked like sandbags against him, he smirked, as if daring the court to defy him. The judges filed in, 3 senior officers chosen for their impartiality. Their faces betrayed nothing. The prosecutor, Major Blackwood, gave her closing argument first. Her words were cold steel. This case is not about demanding excellence. It is about engineering failure. General sabotaged his cadets, not to prepare them for war, but to ensure they never fought at all. He turned training into humiliation. He turned evaluation into sabotage, and he cloaked it all in the language of discipline. She held up the evidence, tampered rifles, logs, corrupted emails. This was not the defense of standards. This was the destruction of them. Her voice lowered steady. And when confronted, when his system failed to break one cadet, he resorted to force. That wrist brace you see is not proof of Cadet Brown's instability. It is proof of his desperation. She stepped back, her gaze never leaving the judges. Then Colonel Graves rose for the defense. His words were fire and venom. General is a soldier of honor, a man who bled for this country while others debated policy from armchairs. And now he stands accused, not of corruption, not of treason, but of demanding toughness. Cadet Brown may be skilled, but she is also reckless. Her refusal to obey an order, her violent act against a superior officer, proves exactly what General warned. Women are not suited to combat leadership. Their emotions override discipline. Their fragility endangers lives. His voice thundered through the courtroom. You cannot convict a man for telling the truth. He sat satisfied, as murmurs rippled through the benches. The judges, the courtroom buzzed with whispers, nervous shuffles, the scratching of pens. Minutes dragged like hours. Sat still, hands folded, her breathing slow. She thought of Sarah, of Hayes, of the women who had left, broken and convinced they weren't enough. She thought of her grandfather who had told her that dignity doesn't speak, it acts. And she realized this wasn't about her anymore. The verdict, whatever it was, would belong to every woman who had ever been told, you don't belong here. The doors opened, the judges returned, silence fell instantly. The presiding judge, General, read the decision. On the charge of sabotage of training equipment, guilty. On the charge of systematic discrimination against female cadets, guilty. On the charge of assault against a subordinate, guilty. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer, guilty. The words rang like bells, tolling across the room. Smirk vanished. His face hardened, pale with disbelief. General's voice carried the final weight. Is hereby stripped of rank, stripped of honors, and dismissed from service with immediate effect. Further, this court recommends review of all related training programs and the disbandment of the Standards Preservation Group. The gavel struck. It was done. The courtroom erupted. Some gasped, some cheered. Reporters rushed out to feed the world the headline, guilty, system exposed. Sat frozen, the words echoing in her chest. Guilty. He was guilty. The system had been named for what it was. James clasped her shoulder. You did it, he whispered. She shook her head slowly. No, we did. Outside, the rain had stopped. The courtyard was packed with cameras, microphones, chanting crowds. Supporters waved signs, strength knows no gender, truth wins. Others, fewer but loud, shouted back, standards matter, was right. The divide was clear. The battle wasn't over, but a line had been drawn. The reforms began quickly. Colonel Thornton announced a full review of training programs. NATO issued directives for transparency and equality audits across member states. The Ministry of Defense commissioned independent oversight of recruitment, training, and promotion systems. Lieutenant Hayes was reinstated, offered a command position she had been for years. Sarah re-enlisted, her resignation voided, her future reopened. And she was offered something unexpected. A transfer to advanced sniper training, her original dream, now within reach. But also an advisory role, working with NATO to implement reform across Allied forces. The choice felt heavy. She could finally pursue her path as a soldier, rifle in hand, or step into the spotlight she never asked for, to ensure no one else endured what she had. Her grandfather's words echoed again. Sometimes, Fee, you play their game long enough to change the rules. Now she had the chance to rewrite them entirely. Its downfall rippled wider than anyone predicted. The Standards Preservation Group began to crumble. Names surfaced. Investigations opened. Careers ended. What had been whispered in shadows was dragged into the light. But not all enemies fell. Some retreated deeper, bitter and waiting. They muttered about betrayal, about tradition lost, about softness invading the military. Knew their fight wasn't over. Prejudice doesn't vanish with a verdict. It adapts, hides, waits. And yet, for the first time, she felt hope. She stood one evening on the training range, the sun sinking over the fields, her rifle cradled in her hands. Alone, she took aim. The targets fell one by one, clean, precise, steady. 17 in a row, perfect. She lowered the rifle, her chest rising with calm pride, not for herself alone, for everyone who had been told you can't, for everyone who had believed it. The silence after her last shot felt like a promise. The press followed her everywhere. They wanted speeches, interviews, declined most. She didn't want fame, she wanted change. When she finally spoke, her words were simple. Strength is not about exclusion, it is about resilience, and resilience belongs to all of us. Those words echoed across television screens, across social media feeds, across the hearts of young women watching from homes, schools, and bases around the world. For the first time, they saw themselves not as liabilities, but as possibilities. But knew her journey wasn't finished. The verdict had exposed corruption, but reform would be a long war. And like all wars, it would be fought in battles both loud and quiet, public and hidden. She knew backlash would come. She knew some would never accept her. But she also knew this. She had survived sabotage, humiliation, and the full weight of a system designed to break her. And she was still standing. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And her next act was only beginning. What happens when one soldier's defiance becomes more than survival, when it becomes a legacy? Months had passed since the gavel fell. His name was stripped from the academy walls, his medals returned, his portraits removed, his authority erased. What remained was not his power, but the shadow of his crimes, a cautionary tale etched into the institution he once ruled. But's name, it grew. Quietly at first, a whisper among cadets, she didn't break. Then in classrooms, her story used as case study, how truth exposes lies, how resilience survives sabotage. And beyond, in NATO halls and international commands, her defiance became symbol. The cadet who stood against a general, the young woman who held her ground when the system tried to bury her. She never asked to be remembered that way, yet memory clung to her like a shadow. Reforms rippled outward. New oversight systems were installed. Independent auditors monitored training. Equipment was logged, inspected, and distributed with transparency. Instructors underwent mandatory reviews. For the first time, cadets were given confidential reporting channels that bypassed their direct superiors. Across NATO, partner nations launched similar programs. Patterns once dismissed as coincidence were scrutinized. Quiet networks that had echoed beliefs were rooted out. Not every reform stuck easily. Resistance remained. But the stone had been thrown into the pond and the ripples kept spreading. Herself faced choices she never imagined. She was offered a permanent advisory role with NATO, a chance to help redesign training for future generations. She was offered promotions, interviews, even book deals. But she still found her peace behind the scope of a rifle. Sniper training became her refuge. Alone on the range, she could block out the noise, the protests, the praise, the endless questions. There was only her breath, her heartbeat, the target. Each shot was its own form of truth, undeniable, clean, absolute. And yet, she knew her life could never return to what it had been. Every mission, every step, every word she spoke would carry the weight of expectation. Some would always see her as a symbol, others as a threat. But she chose neither role. She chose to remain what she had always been, a soldier. Letters continued to arrive, not the threats, those she stopped reading, but the others. A young cadet from Spain wrote, "When they doubted me, I remembered you." A lieutenant from Poland, "Your stand changed our program. Now we are tested fairly." A teenage girl from Manchester, "I never thought someone like me could be strong. Then I saw your story." Kept those letters in a box beneath her bunk. On hard days, she opened them, not to remind herself of fame, but of responsibility. Each letter was a reminder that silence had once been the enemy, and now, because she had spoken through action, others had found their voices. One evening, Colonel Thornton invited her into the old briefing hall, the same room where had once dismissed her, where she had stood ignored while maps stretched across the table and decisions were made without her. The room looked different now, lighter, more voices. Female cadets sat at the table alongside men, speaking, debating, respected. Thornton nodded toward them. "This is what you changed, not me, not the investigators, you." Shook her head slowly. "I only wanted to prove I belonged." Thornton's eyes softened. "And in proving it, you proved it for all of them." But new victories were never final. The whispers never fully disappeared. There were still those who called her dangerous, disruptive, weak in disguise. There were still networks hiding in shadows, waiting for the moment to reassert control. She carried that knowledge with her like weight in her rucksack, heavy but necessary. Because resilience wasn't about ending the fight, it was about being ready when it returned. Her defining moment came not in court, not on the range, but in a quiet visit to a small graveyard in the countryside. Her grandfather's headstone stood beneath an oak, weathered but proud. She knelt before it, fingers tracing the name. "Granddad," she whispered, her voice breaking softly. "You were right, dignity doesn't speak, it acts. I didn't plan any of this. I just did what I thought was right, and somehow it was enough." Her chest tightened, eyes wet. "But it's not over. The world thinks I'm a symbol now. Maybe I am, but I'll keep acting the way you taught me. I'll keep steady, I'll keep breathing, and I'll keep firing straight." The wind rustled through the branches like an answer. She closed her eyes, feeling his presence not as memory, but as guidance. And in that moment, she wasn't the cadet who broke a general's wrist or the soldier who hit 17 targets perfectly. She was simply his granddaughter, and that was enough. Time passed. New cadets entered, most never knowing her story in detail. They trained under reformed systems with equipment that worked, with instructors held accountable. They faced their own battles, personal, physical, emotional. But they faced them on even ground. And somewhere out there continued her work. Sometimes behind the scope of a rifle, sometimes in quiet advisory rooms, sometimes just as a name whispered in encouragement between cadets. Her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to all who followed. Years later, a reporter asked her one question during a rare interview. "Do you think you changed the system?" Paused, her gaze distant, reflective. "No," she said softly. "I think I showed that it could be changed. The real work is being done by the ones who came after me." The reporter pressed, "And what do you think your legacy is?" Lips curved, not quite a smile. "Legacy isn't a word soldiers get to choose. But if mine is anything, I hope it's this: that when they tried to break us, we stood. And when they tried to silence us, we acted." And so her story faded into the larger story of reform, resilience, and quiet revolution. Not a tale of explosions or glory, but of endurance, of dignity, of one cadet who refused to let go of her weapon, refused to let go of herself, refused to let go of truth. And from that refusal, something greater was born. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.